This past week, I was reminded of a statistic that is quite staggering. Did you know that there are currently in the world more people in a state of slavery than at any other time of human history? It's quite astonishing. In the past year or so, a couple years, I've been able to visit the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. I've had the privilege to visit the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, learning about the history of chattel slavery in this country, and the numbers are just staggering, unimaginable. To consider that now is worse than any other time. And there's been a change in terminology, appropriately so, because the form of slavery continues to evolve. You might have heard the term human trafficking, to move human beings against their will and to put them in situations where they're not seen and treated as humans, but they are used for whatever ends. I was reminded of this fact this past week when I went to go see the movie The Sound of Freedom. You may have heard of it. Some of you may have seen it. If you're willing, of those who have seen it, you're welcome to raise your hand so that if anyone hasn't seen it and they know you, they can go, hey, tell me about it. Now, I do want to prepare you. This movie is difficult to watch. The content is heart-wrenching, but it is also inspiring to see how people who have become aware of the great evil that is in human trafficking have responded to it. And the makers of the movie had this intent to bring awareness to the public so that we can discern how we can make a dent, how we can bring a ray of light and hope to our hurting world. As I reflected on the movie, which for this forum here today, I'll be very benign. Let me just say that the movie, the subject, is about taking the most vulnerable among us and putting them in a state of slavery. Considering that, and our second reading today, where St. Paul says, we have a hope in that creation itself will be set free from slavery to corruption and share in the glorious freedom of the children of God. Last week in our Sunday Gospel, Jesus spoke to us in the midst of being wearied and overburdened and said, come to me and find rest. Lean upon my heart and learn from me, for I'm meek and humble of heart, and I will refresh you. I would say that our second reading today, building upon how God is with us here and now in the midst of our sufferings, St. Paul, taking from the gospel message, is helping us to always keep today's pains and sufferings and tribulations in perspective of the greater perspective of eternity, to see them comparing this reality with the next, which is so important for us who believe that we are pilgrims on a journey on the way to glory in heaven. But it's very important to remember that he's speaking comparatively. If you only take one side of the equation, it doesn't work so well. So he uses the image of labor pains. If I were to say, labor pains are as nothing, if I stopped there, I'd probably be run out of the church by every woman who's ever given birth. But if we take from Jesus's words, and he says, comparatively, when a woman is in labor, she is in anguish because her hour has arrived. But when she has given birth to a child, she no longer remembers the pain because of her joy that a child has been born into the world. So husbands, if you're there in the delivery room, I just want to encourage you that you may not try to use the tactic at that moment. Don't worry, honey, you're going to forget about this real soon. It's probably not what she wants to hear in that moment. Not an expert celibate Catholic priest, but for those who have had that experience of childbirth, can you relate to that? It doesn't make it less true, even though in the moment it's so hard to grasp because the pain can be so great. Physical pain, emotional pain, existential pain. Saint Teresa of Avila, the great Carmelite reformer, in her own words, gives us again this staggering proclamation. This woman who experienced great suffering in her lifetime, reformers are never very popular with their own people, but yet she also experienced great tastes of ecstasy, tastes of this glory to come. And here's what she has to say about this. She says, in light of heaven, the worst suffering on earth, a life full of the most atrocious tortures on earth, will be seen as no more serious than one night in an inconvenient hotel. Now, maybe you've had that experience. You saw that deal online that you thought was too good to be true, that steal of a deal to stay in some hotel. You can park there, you can get a ride to the airport there, and you can sleep there. You know, they have these deals. I led a pilgrimage last year, and there was quite the conversation among the pilgrims who took advantage of one of those deals and spent the next 24 to 48 hours talking about how they regretted that decision. The pictures were very outdated. There was mold and stains in the ceiling. Their single room wasn't a single if you counted all of the insects that they found and other things. But as bad as an experience as you might have had, staying in some place that was undesirable or sleeping on your friend's couch, you thought it would be fine and then you wake up and your back hurts, whatever the case is, try to think about that. In light of heaven, all of the suffering of the whole of our life in heaven would just seem like one night at a bad hotel. I don't know if I'm speaking to you right now and what you need to hear, or maybe to where you'll be sometime down the road. Or maybe I can speak to a word of hope to you that you can bring to your neighbor this week. Whatever the case is, it is so important for us to hold this truth in our consciousness to keep us steady and grounded, especially in the most difficult moments. If we consider the parable of the sower and the seed, I think of that person who on Sunday hears the word and receives it with joy. Yes, in heaven things will be glorious, but then goes back to the rest of their week, and that quickly gets uprooted by the challenges that they face. I hope to equip you just with a few reflections so that the seeds planted today may remain and may bear fruit. We have a great friend in C.S. Lewis, a great apologist, a defender of the Christian faith against many modern questions. When people balk at this promise of glory in heaven and you won't think about your sufferings anymore, he has responses to them that may ground us. And I know it's hard to believe, but I was once a teenager. And sitting in pews just like these, had these very questions that I didn't know how to respond to. And sometimes if we don't have answers to legitimate doubts that come up, or how our experience doesn't seem to reflect the promises that we're hoping in, it can be challenging, and if we don't address them, those seeds of doubt can also grow, and their fruit is not good. So if there are young people here, or of any age, who are hearing this good news today and going, yeah, but I don't know, it's kind of too good to be true. Or if you have had others question this, or if you are in a supportive role of one of our young people and want to have a better answer, well, because the Bible says, or because the church says, then hopefully this can equip you. C.S. Lewis, in responding to the objection that this is a pie-in-the-sky promise just to kind of keep us on the journey, hoping in this ideal of heaven, he says, you know, it's not unreasonable to look forward to the object of your desire. Do not young people do this when they fall in love and look forward to enjoying the goods of marriage? Does a reader look forward to and looks forward to desiring reading the book of their favorite author that is just about to be released? Or is it wrong that the athlete looks forward to the promises of winning the competition or of a well-trained physical body by hoping in the good of the exercise that he or she is doing today. He says it is not wrong to look forward to and to delight in the promises to come. He says specifically, it doesn't spoil our desire or taint it to promise to the pure of heart that they will one day see God. He said, because only the pure of heart desire to. The second question or objection that he responds to is that, well, if we keep our eyes too much focused on heaven, then we will be indifferent to suffering today. But he says, no, we have a duty to live out the good news also by living out good deeds. That we have to celebrate the love that God has for us by being that love and goodness for others. We have a Christian duty to work to alleviate the sufferings that we are aware of in this world. There are things that only God can do, conquering sin and death and evil. But there are things that we are called to do, and to pick up our cross and to dirty our hands in order to be a force of good in the world today. And thirdly and finally, C.S. Lewis warns us of a false comparison, just as St. Paul is comparing now to the future in a healthy way so that we have a proper perspective about today. He says, there are those who will say, but if you compared all of the suffering, all of the sum of the suffering of the world, if you saw it in its magnitude, it would be inconsistent with a belief in a God who is good and is loving. Well, he gives us a response to that. He says, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of pain, but we shouldn't fall into the mistake of exaggerating it greater than it really is. He says, imagine that you're in a doctor's office, like at the dentist, and you have a toothache. And someone could ask you, well, what's your pain level out of 10? You could say, well, I have a 6. And then they could go to the other person in the waiting room and say, well, what's your pain level? And they could say, it's also a 6. He says, maybe, C.S. Lewis says, maybe there's a place you could say that the total sum of pain in the room is 12, 6 times 2. He's like, but it's irrelevant. Why? Because no single person experiences that. It's not in their consciousness. And so when people seek to weigh all of the suffering in the world, he says this, there is no such thing as a sum of suffering, for no one suffers it. When we have reached the maximum that a single person can suffer, we have no doubt reached something very horrible, but we have reached all the suffering there can ever be in the universe. The addition of 1,000,000 fellow sufferers adds no more pain. Now, I know this may seem a little abstract for a Sunday morning, and if it is, I apologize. But I hope that as we are preparing our hearts and our minds to receive the seeds of truth in the gospel, we understand that suffering can affect us in 2 basic ways. It can plow the soil of our heart so that we are more disposed to God and more empathetic with the suffering of our neighbor. It can make us into great saints. And probably, if you have researched the story of your favorite saints, you can see how suffering played a big role in their growth and holiness. But suffering is morally neutral. It doesn't automatically make you a greater saint. If we allow these doubts to fester about the pains we experience, then suffering can also harden our heart. It can even lead us to ultimately give up our faith. My hope is that today we are more equipped that when these doubts arise, whether it is our suffering or the suffering of one we love, we know that Jesus is not indifferent to our suffering. He has taken them upon himself, and he has conquered sin and death and is preparing a place for us that is greater than we can imagine. And if we can hold true to this promise, and if we can believe, even in the darkest of moments, that all of the suffering we have experienced in this life will be as nothing in the life to come, then we can remain rooted, we can remain faithful, we can remain hopeful and we can share that gift of hope and the glory that is to come.